And getting ready to start working on this bad boy again. This is another build that manifested itself out of thin air. It's got quite a bit of a story to it. For those that don't know, because I did start this in 2020, and this is a 1200 sporty engine. It's a 97, so it's solid mount, solid frame mount. I believe 2003 is when they started rubber mount. But this is solid mount, which was actually good for what I needed, for what I was going to do with it. So anyway, this story began whenever a buddy of mine actually lived right down the street. He had a dad south of Dallas, Texas, that had a huge barn/garage with a motorcycle collection in it, and the whole freaking thing burned down. And he called me up one day, and this motorcycle sidecar body was in that fire. It's a Steib sidecar, Steib, and they're actually really collectible and vintage mint condition, which this is not. And it was on a BMW motorcycle. Steib is actually a World War II era manufacturer of them. They've been around a really long time. And anyway, the garage burned down. This was in it, and his dad he didn't want to get rid of it. He didn't want to just throw it in the trash, which I totally understand. And he had mentioned to his dad, he said, I know this really badass welder that could probably make something really cool with that. And he got a hold of me and told me the situation. It was like, I'm already down here. I got my truck. You want me to bring it up to you? And of course I agreed. I'm not going to argue with free, even if I don't know what I'm going to do with it. This is actually the mechanical lever that opens the rear opening deck lid for this, which is, I've got it right there. It's just off because I'm getting ready to work on the rear end of this. But anyhow, I held on to it for 2 or 3 months, and I was so busy with other stuff at the time, I just let it sit out back, and I was almost about to not even do anything with it. And I had a minute one day, so I drug it in here and I put it on the shop floor, and I was thinking, looking at it, I'm like, because this had a nose on the front, and you can see right here this line, that body line right there, that was actually notched out. And I was looking at it, and I'm like, if you cut that nose off square and I fill in that notch, which is actually for the passenger to put their leg in and out, and put a roof on this, it would be exactly like a Model A, lines wise. And I guess not many other people saw it or thought I was crazy. And I'm like, you know what? I got an idea for this thing. I'm going to turn this into a Model A body, and I'm going to make it, it was at the time supposed to be a small go-kart. And I even bought a 420 Hemi Predator for it that was going to go in it. And then whenever I got into looking into the price of doing that, I'm like, I found this 1200 sporty engine. I know this is going to be an engineering nightmare to put it in compared to the 420 Predator, but it would be 1,000 times cooler and obviously more powerful if I can put the 1200 Sportster engine in it. And that's how this whole thing happened. So, I got the oil tank up here. I put it there to represent like the old nitro tanks on the gasser cars. I even found this cool moon eyes cap for it, spinner cap. And runs and drives now, but there are some things with it that don't perform the way I want them to, mainly the rear suspension, which it was a big thing, just trying to figure out how I was going to do the drive on this with front engine, rear wheel drive, and chain all the way through. Because the ironic thing is a motorcycle fire caused this, and this is essentially a half-scale car built with all motorcycle stuff. So it's like, how often does that come along? But anyway, since driving it the way that it is, I don't like the way the rear suspension performs, and I have big chain clearance problems. The chain's off right now between the final drive and where this jack shaft mounts down here. So I'm actually going to be moving the braking and the final drive outboard of the frame rather than inboard. And then I'm also going to be getting rid of these shock towers and converting this to cantilever rear suspension with these shocks mounted this way, front to back on the frame. Should be much stronger and perform way better. And it'll also give me the option as well later, if I want to ditch this body completely and build a sedan body, which would, this is the coupe. The sedan comes all the way back to here and then drops down. I could actually move this fuel cell and get the seat back further. Basically have much more driver comfort. But I don't know about doing that because then I lose the history of this body. I don't think it's the right thing to do. So I'm going to get ready on tearing all of this out and getting some video of the original suspension first. So we got this stock set up right now, or what is referred to as stock at this point. And there's been a couple major issues with this design. And it's one of the main reasons why, for all the people out there that are always like, when are you going to rip on this thing and come on, beat the hell out of it and everything. For one thing, that was never my intention for this build. I know people are used to watching like grind hard plumbing videos where that's what they do with their little Hot Wheels go-karts. But that's not what I built this for. It was actually, I built this more for car shows and motorcycle shows than ripping around in the field off-road. But the major problems I had with getting on it or driving this more aggressively is the engine actually is driven with a short chain that comes down off of the counter shaft sprocket on the engine to this lower jack shaft. And then there's another sprocket next to it, and that chain would come back to this mount right here, which is actually for another jack shaft. And then from this jack shaft, you would have your final drive going to that sprocket. And in between this sprocket and the final drive sprocket, I was actually running this double-sided free-floating sprint car chain tensioner, and this is able to tension a chain both ways, because with a clutch drive, not a torque converter, a clutch drive, when you get off the gas and decelerate, the lower chain tightens and the upper chain is slack, and when you accelerate, the top tightens and the lower is slack, which is why you run those sprint car chain tensioners in here to handle it both ways. Well, the problem was clearances were so tight for this that under acceleration, when that top chain would snap tight, it actually was hitting the seat right there. It actually, and believe me, I've tried to pound that out with a hammer. That stuff is hard, man. That aluminum is really hard. But it hit it so violently, it actually dented that in. And the other thing is, the bottom of the fuel cell is actually right there, underneath that drive sprocket. Now, I know I could make a guard for that, but right now there isn't. And if anything had let loose, the chain or whatever, from dumping the clutch, anything, you could potentially break that chain and knock a hole right through that fuel cell, or the chain could whip forward and go right through that seat into my ass, which neither one would be a good situation. So if you're wondering why there's no videos of me doing burnouts and dumping the clutch and driving like Bo Duke essentially, that's why. And this is also the reason why I'm moving the drive and the brake from inboard the frame rails to outboard. Besides, like I had mentioned, if I wanted to later change this body from coupe to sedan, if there's nothing down the center, then I can move the seat back. Right now, this seat position is limited by that chain clearance and the body. Because even if you move the seat back, your head is still going to come into this. So that's where I'm at. And I mean, I'm 5'9", and I can get in here, which is through the roof. I can get in and drive somewhat comfortably. It's actually not that bad. But a lot of the guys that have been bugging me about buying this thing, they're 6 foot, 6'2", and I'm like, I don't know, man. So after some thinking with this whole setup, what I decided to do was get rid of all of this, because I can't move the sprocket or the brake out with this shock tower here. There's just no way. So I'm actually going to lower this mounting position from the front heim down to here, which is going to solve the problem as well with the chain tightening with the suspension travel, because then it's going to be on the same pivot point as the jack shaft. I'm going to run one bar, one bigger 1¼ inch bar on a heim from there all the way back to here as well. And then have another link right here with a heim and a heim. And then right around here, mount a triangle plate with 3 pivot points. And then this shock will then mount this way on the frame. So when this lifts up on that, it'll push forward on the shock. That's going to get all of this out of here, this whole thing, and free it up to put my drive and sprockets on the outside of the frame rails. And I'm also stepping up. This is all 1 inch with 5/8 heims, which the 5/8 heims is definitely not the problem. But I already got these two 1¼ legs at 120 wall. And as well as for those, I'm definitely going with tubing and weld-in adapters, weld-in bungs for the heims. Here's 2 of the heims with the adapters already on them. And that right there, that machined end, actually, most of you probably already know this, but they go inside the tubing and then you weld all the way around it. Right now, I just welded some nuts on there. Granted, everything on here is TIG welded, but really, this isn't the safest practice. So I'm going to go up to 1¼ from 1 inch, and then everything's going to get bungs, weld-in bungs for the heim joints. And really with these shock towers, this works, but under load, that can still flex in. And with running a cantilever setup with the shock mounted this way, that eliminates that completely. And there we are. 2 shock towers. 2 front Heims brackets. All cleaned up. Gotta go ahead and grind that stuff off. But frame rails are all smooth and ready for some new suspension. Okay guys, that's it for this one. There's a couple things I need to do before I get going on the next video, which I'm going to get into building the new link bars for this. But before I do that, I need to put the rear jack shaft back in so I know where my center line is for the front mounting point for the link bars. I also need to measure the distance between the rear wheels with the rear wheels mounted on the axle with it out of here. I need that distance so I know the width to build the new components. And there's some old brackets, the carriers for the old bearings that I'm going to be reusing, so I need to cut all of that out. And I like to reuse as much as possible just to keep costs down. Steel is expensive. So I'm going to get that stuff taken care of, and we'll pick this up on the next video. So thanks for tuning in.